The hardest hit, Aceh wiped out by the tsunami. Disposing of the dead to try and save the living. And a grave warning, expect more Australian casualties. Good evening. The tsunami toll is now reaching levels no heart or mind can truly comprehend. Some authorities are predicting the number of deaths will reach 100,000 by the weekend. This evening it's been confirmed at least 82,000 people have perished. 5 million people are now desperate for basic necessities, and they're the lucky ones. National 9 News correspondents are covering this catastrophe right across Asia. Tonight we begin on the tip of Indonesia with Brett McLeod in Aceh, where at least half of all casualties are known to have perished. Brett.
We're at what is effectively the tsunami's ground zero. This is the closest land point to the epicentre of the earthquake which started all this devastation. The death toll here continues to rise each day, not by the hundreds, not by the thousands, but by the tens of thousands. This was the moment of shattering impact. A family trapped on the second floor of their apartment captured the sea swallowing their town. They were certain they'd die, they said, yet somehow they survived. Others too made it to safety, cowering on high ground as the rush of water passed. 4 days on and the devastation is absolute. This is all that remains of the once thriving fishing port near Banda Aceh. Twisted wrecks of trawlers litter the coast. No one knows how many died here. In the town centre, those lucky enough to survive pull body after body from beneath the rubble. The stench is overwhelming. Corpses are being taken out of town by the truckload and buried in mass graves. There's no time to identify the dead. They're trying to clear the streets, but it's an impossible task. Every neighbourhood has been destroyed. Tens of thousands have lost their homes.
Nothing left? Nothing left.
Nothing at all?
My house has been destroyed, everything.
Destroyed?
Yes.
And first pictures today of Mulabo, one of the closest villages to the epicentre. More than half the population is believed to have been wiped out when the tsunami hit. Those who escaped the rushing water are nursing their wounds in makeshift shelters. If aid doesn't reach this region soon, many, if not most, will die from disease. Some aid is on its way. 2 Australian C-130 Hercules aircraft have unloaded their supplies in Banda Aceh.
Water, ration, medical supplies.
More than 100 refugees then boarded the flight back to the northern Sumatran capital, Medan. The elderly helped on board, mothers cradling their babies. They have almost nothing, but at least they're alive. In Indonesia, Brett McLeod, National 9 News.
As we've reported over the past few days, the bulk of Australian casualties lost their lives in the beach resorts of Thailand. We now cross to our Asia correspondent Mark Burrows to report on the struggle to find the missing.
And a heartbreaking struggle it is too for countless people in this country, including one Sydney man who has flown here to try and locate his pregnant sister and her husband. He's hanging on to the hope that somehow they have survived. Peter Vogel has flown into an epicentre of misery and chaos. He's on a mission to find his sister and brother-in-law. Moy and Christian, not from Sydney, were married just 3 months ago and were enjoying a delayed honeymoon at Koh Lak, north of Phuket. They phoned home on Christmas Day, but haven't been heard from since.
As diabetes, they've taken off up the mountains to get away from it all.
Did they do that?
Oh, stranger things have been known to happen.
Peter and his 4 mates went straight to Phuket's main hospital, scouring the lists of dead and injured. There was no record of either Moy or Christian. What are you hoping to achieve now, Pete? What's your plan here at the moment?
Well, the closure, know what happened. Find them the best option, but really prepared for both ways.
Moy and Christian were staying in one of the beachside resorts at Koh Lak. Up to 3,000 tourists, mostly Europeans, were killed here. What Port Douglas is to Australia, Khao Lak is to Thailand. Before the tidal wave hit this resort, hundreds of people here were preparing for walks into the rainforest or diving tours off the coast. But then came a 10-metre high wall of water. Some never even made it out of their bungalows. Peter Vogel can only hope and pray that somehow Moy and Christian survived this devastation. Heading into the same area, a team of 17 Australian disaster victim identification experts. They will concentrate their skills, honed in Bali, on one area of Colac where more than 1,000 bodies are lying in the sun.
I think everyone needs to understand the sheer scale, the enormity of this particular process and the sheer scale of the disaster itself.
The mission is open-ended. It could take weeks, possibly months, putting names to victims. The Australians who live here are pitching in to help the victims of this disaster. Brad Schmidt reports on the Aussie spirit, alive and well here in Phuket.
Aussie expat Mark Bright doesn't know how many people he's helped. What he does know is there's a desperate need.
Loads, I don't know. Just walking up to people and just ask them, just give them a lift or point them in the right direction.
He's done much more than that, such as helping this Australian couple find a flight back home.
It's a human nature, isn't it, really? I think it's just that everyone's just so shocked. You've got to do something. You know, my wife rang me up the other day and said, you know, what can we do to help?
There was also the Scandinavian man who lost his wife in Colac.
So I took him home and gave him some clothes and everything. He didn't have anything.
Today he's on another mission to find a deaf and dumb Swedish boy who's missing. His first stop is to check the lists at the Disaster Relief Command Centre.
The thing is with the list is they don't know whether they're dead, they don't know whether they're found, they don't know anything.
While Australia has pledged millions of dollars to the relief effort here, there's also a sense of frustration among some Australian tourists that the initial response was too slow.
The Germans are all set up and they've got little booths everywhere and the Israelis are in there, and I haven't seen much of Australians, you know.
For Damien Clute from the Gold Coast, these are the hardest of days. His Japanese wife Yumi is still one of the missing thousands. Today her parents flew in, doing what they can to console their son-in-law.
I have not slept for 4 days. I've been looking every single minute I can. Everything that I can. Okay, thank you very much. Everything I can.
In one dark moment, this British woman discovers that a photo of a dead tourist is the person she's been looking for.
Sophie!
Their 3-day search has now ended. The grief is just beginning. There was some brighter news for 2-year-old Hans Bergström, the boy from Sweden who lay unclaimed in a Phuket hospital for 2 days. Today he was finally back in the arms of his father, a scene that's both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Hans' mother is still missing. In Phuket, Brad Schmidt, National 9 News.
Mass burials have been quickly organised in Sri Lanka amid what is shaping up to be the nation's costliest natural disaster. We now cross to a current affairs Simon Boda in the capital, Colombo. Simon.
Mark, bodies are being buried in their thousands here in a desperate bid to stop the outbreak of disease. Such is the scale of the operation, there's often no time to identify the victims, leaving their loved ones in limbo. Scouring makeshift morgues for the corpses of their loved ones is not the holiday these tourists had in mind.
Someone from your family missing? Yes, my ex-wife and one son.
Survivors scrutinise the list of the dead, hoping they don't see a name they recognise. At least they'd have closure. As the days pass, simply identifying the corpses becomes more difficult.
Bodies are in a very, very bad shape, and it's, I would say, impossible to identify a body.
And the first pictures from the Tamil Tiger-controlled east coast of Sri Lanka. Some supplies have made it through, though much of the area is inaccessible due to crumbling infrastructure. Closer to the epicentre, on the remote Andaman and Nicobar Islands off India's coast, the number of missing outweighs the number of people found alive.
Total figure is 20,000. Half of them are missing.
No contact has been made with several of the smaller islands. From the air, it seems many may still be completely underwater. People have been evacuated to a refugee camp at the capital, Port Blair. Many fear they have no home to return to.
Thailand is totally destroyed, worst.
Significant tremors are still being felt on the Isles, so people are staying outside just to be safe. And in India, in accordance with Hindu traditions, funeral pyres to farewell the dead. Mark, in breaking news, we've just been told that a tsunami warning has been issued for the Indian state of Tamil Nadu. Now that follows those aftershocks in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands.
OK, Simon, thank you. Prime Minister Howard today warned the nation to be prepared for a dramatic rise in the number of Australian casualties as the government struggles to account for all of the missing. Here is what we can tell you about the Australian toll. 10 Australians are confirmed dead. The latest victim, 3-year-old Sasha Shrikau from Bagolda on Sydney's northern beaches. There are serious concerns for 12 more, including AFL player Troy Broadbridge, Cairns teacher Kim Walsh and Perth seaman Jim Sparrow. And then there's the unaccounted for figure, which stands at 1,000 in the worst affected areas. Little wonder the Australians who flew home today are so relieved.
One by one, our wounded come home, delivered into the arms of safety. While their physical suffering is plain to see, the emotional turmoil of the last 6 days is perhaps greater. Returning on a special Qantas flight from Phuket, the tsunami's victims included the parents of Paul Jardina, the teenager with Down syndrome, killed by the first wave. Once inside the terminal, victims were greeted by an even bigger support crew. Ambulance officers to treat the wounded, counsellors to console those who'd lost loved ones, and Centrelink representatives offering financial assistance. Honeymooners returned, some full of courage.
I would return to their country and their towns without the blink of an eye.
Others with home video footage they never thought they'd have. But amid all the tales of survival, this is what they were waiting for.
To be home with my family and back in Australia, you can't get much better.
Jessica Rich, National 9 News.
The tragedy of the tsunami disaster is also being felt across Europe, where the number of expected deaths per capita is very high, especially in Scandinavia. And there is pressure on British Prime Minister Tony Blair to cut his holiday short, with 50 Britons feared dead.
The switchboard of a London police call centre is approaching meltdown.
We got the name of the person you reported.
But even after 40,000 calls a day, not everyone's getting through.
Always to know, where their relatives are. Like my son, for instance, I just don't know.
Since it happened on Boxing Day, just stuck by the phone, 24/7.
Of all the European regions suffering, Scandinavia has been hit hardest, with 1,500 Swedes, 440 Norwegians and 200 tourists from Finland unaccounted for. Every Christmas in their millions, Europeans escape the harshness of their winter and head south for the tropics. Now, as they return in their thousands each day, the bitter cold from which they were so anxious to flee has never been so warming. It was snowing as German survivors spoke of their ordeal. This man was being interviewed in a T-shirt. He didn't care. He was home. In London, Adam Walters, National 9 News.
More than $250 million in aid has now been pledged around the world. But with the mammoth job ahead, aid agencies say more, much more, will be needed in the months and years ahead.
Touring the Foreign Affairs Response Centre, the Prime Minister moved to ensure that Australia does what it can to ease the torment that's ravaging South and Southeast Asia. He urged Australians who are still in the area to leave before the fear of disease becomes a reality, and had a warning for anybody still planning to go there.
I would counsel Australians who are contemplating going to immediately adjoining areas consider postponing those plans.
With that, Mr Howard announced that 3 Iroquois helicopters will be sent to Indonesia immediately on an Antonov transport aircraft. HMAS Kanimbla will also head there, carrying, among other things, 2 helicopters and around 100 defence personnel. A 90-bed field hospital will be flown in, and refrigeration equipment is next on the list. Meanwhile, in his first comments on the disaster, President Bush said the US and Australia were among a 4-nation coalition coordinating the relief response.
We're committed to helping the affected countries in the difficult weeks
and months that lie ahead.
And the Pope has renewed his call for nations to provide aid to affected countries. Australians wishing to contribute can do so through several aid agencies. The Red Cross, Care Australia, World Vision and Oxfam are all accepting donations. Rachel Rollo, National 9 News.